Here's what's coming up on the Weekend Review. The Eskom board has welcomed the appointment of Den Marokane as the new group chief executive of Eskom. The National Council of Provinces has voted in favor of the National Health Insurance Bill. The DA in KwaZulu-Natal has announced it has increased the reward for information that leads to the arrest as well as conviction of the killers of its chief whip in the Umgeni municipality, Councillor Nhlalayenza Ndlovu. A very good afternoon. If you've just joined us, we are coming to you live from our studios here in Johannesburg. Welcome to the Week in Review, the program where we review some of the biggest stories to come out of the week. I'm your host, Alisha Jali. Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, Barbara Creasy, says the draft text on stock take is still being discussed by countries. The text will include the success and challenges of the previous climate change negotiations as well as agreements to reduce greenhouse emissions. Now, the minister also touched on the issues of biodiversity loss as well as climate change at the South African Pavilion, where different events as well as discussions are taking place since the start of COP28 out in Dubai. SABC International editor Sophie Mokoena filed this report for us.
It is day 2 of the ministerial meeting. It is a race against time for ministers to agree on a text on stock take. Minister Barbara Creasy says a lot of work still needs to be done.
Last night we received the third edition of the global stocktake text, and today myself and Minister Jorgensen are meeting the different negotiating groups one by one to find out their views on the draft text. We've since early this morning we've met about I think 6 groups, and we're due to meet another 6 or 7 groups from now on. It's really early days to say where we're going to. We are meeting later this afternoon with the COP president to reflect on what we've heard so far, and I suppose we'll have to later today or tonight to be moving towards a 4th iteration of the text, but it's really just understanding the scope of the divergence at this stage. We're not yet at the point of reaching different landing zones.
Earlier on, the minister was at the South African Pavilion.
The Kunming-Montreal protocol is complicated, and there are many things in that protocol. There are issues about trying to conserve 30% of the land and 30% of the sea by 2030. Now that is very important, and it relates to the climate change objective, because what we understand is that reducing current emissions is one thing, but part of what we're dealing with is 200 years worth of emissions that are the result of the whole history of industrialization. And those emissions are not going anywhere. Those are the emissions that are creating the current temperature increase. And there's really only 2 solutions to those emissions. The one is what we call carbon sinks. So that is why the question of trying to preserve in its existing natural form 30%, the remaining 30% of the land that is not being utilized, or else to restore land to the equivalent of 30%. That is why it's important, because we need the carbon sinks to absorb all of this carbon which is already heating up our atmosphere and causing extreme weather conditions. And of course we know that the sea is a very important carbon sink, so we have to make sure that we are also conserving that potential. I heard a good stat on plastic the other day. They say by 2050 there will be the equivalent of 22 billion elephants worth of plastic in the sea.
It is expected that the president of COP will later today meet with all delegates who are responsible for the talks. Sophie Mukwena, SABC News, Dubai.
And back home, the Eskom board has welcomed the appointment of Dan Marokane as the new group chief executive of Eskom. The announcement was made by Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan. The minister also announced the appointment of Tsepo Monaheng as the new group chief executive officer of the Denel Group. Meanwhile, Marokane returns to Eskom after he and 3 other senior executives were suspended following an ethical stand against state capture, fraud as well as corruption. He has experience working in distressed organizations with visible and pressurized turnaround mandates. His recent assignment was at Tongaat Hewlett, where he stepped up to lead the financially distressed business after its chief executive officer had resigned.
Mr. Marokane is a qualified chemical engineer who has an MBA and is also a seasoned executive with more than 20 years of senior leadership experience. He will join Eskom no later than the 31st of March 2024. His date of commencement of duty will be announced once he has concluded the handover process with his current employer. Minister Gordhan believes that Mr. Marokane has the drive to energetically tackle the challenges confronting Eskom.
All right, with that, we're going to take a quick ad break. We'll be back with the Weekend Review shortly after that. Let's continue with the Weekend Review now. The National Council of Provinces has voted in favor of the National Health Insurance Bill. 8 of the 9 provinces have approved the bill, with only the Western Cape voting against it. The NHI system is expected to be implemented in stages once President Cyril Ramaphosa has approved it. However, healthcare organizations, business and opposition have all strongly opposed it. Now, they've urged the president not to sign the bill into law and to refer it back to Parliament for reconsideration. Government says NHI is designed to use pooled funds to provide access to quality, affordable personal health services for all South Africans based on their health needs, irrespective of socio-economic status. However, it requires raising an additional 200 billion rand in taxes, and business says South Africa does not have the resources. All right, let's get more insight now from Dr. Nicholas Crisp, the Deputy Director General of the NHI at the Department of Health. Doctor, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us. The bill has finally been signed. President Ramaphosa still, of course, has to approve it. So where do we go from here, I guess, is the biggest question right now.
Hi, Alicia, and good afternoon to the viewers. Yeah, so the bill's not signed yet. It's merely passed through Parliament. The final steps are over, and as you said, it goes to the President. The President must exert his own prerogative and may indeed send it back to Parliament or to the Constitutional Court for an opinion, but that we will wait to hear what's going to happen in the coming days. Mm-hmm. From our perspective, we are happy we've reached this hurdle. We've been at it for almost 30 years now. We've been in Parliament for 5 years, so if anybody thinks this is a rush job, well, it's been a snail pace as far as we are concerned, and we are very frustrated it's taken so long to get this far. What will happen, as you indicated in the introduction, is a slow building up of capacity and shifting of funds. So those who detract from what we are doing will, make big statements like you made now about 200 billion rand additional money to be provided without qualifying that is a portion of the money that's already being spent. So we already spend 265 billion rand a year in the public sector, and the private sector, we already spend as South Africans 277 billion rand. And this is collectively the money that we should be getting a decent health service for, and we're not. There's huge waste in both parts of those systems, massive duplications, and that's largely what the NHI aims to do away with.
All right. And then, Doctor, what's your reaction then to views that the court, there can be court challenges or they can be expected if the bill is passed into law without any modifications, not least, or any input from interested groups that wasn't given adequate consideration? Do you believe there are groups that have not been given enough consultation on this matter?
So there's a question of consultation and you do it my way or else. There are different things. In terms of consultation, I've personally attended almost every of the parliamentary hearings through the National Assembly and through the NCOP over the last 2.5 years since COVID. And there have been lots of inputs. I've personally read all 117 of the presentations that were made. Some of them I attended as well. And I have heard the debates and discussions that took place in the various committees. So to say that people's inputs were not considered is not true, but that people's views have not been incorporated entirely into the changes would be correct. Because obviously those who've debated this in Parliament have not agreed. And in fact, some of the things we have that are mooted by these parties, we also don't agree from the department. So that's the nature of where we are. Just because you don't get your way doesn't mean that you're the only one. There are many other parties. If you speak to trade unions like COSATU, if you speak to community groups such as all the civil society organizations we work with in the HIV space, if you talk to some of the doctors' groups like SAMATU, they will tell you a completely different story from those who are against it. So we've been threatened and warned right from the beginning that there will be court cases. Obviously, we've already done a lot of our own homework. We have had many legal opinions. But as we know, like with medical opinions, legal opinions need to be tested. And if they end up being tested in the courts, we will have to defend our views.
Now, Doctor, look, the framework's intention, as I alluded in my intro, is to transform the health services, create equity and equality in the area of healthcare. It can come to an end. Does this mean then anyone with a South African ID can access the services irrespective of whether their credentials have been ratified?
Yeah, so what the bill says, Alicia, is that every person, that's you and me and the other 62 million people who are in the country, must register with the National Health Insurance Fund. It will be a 5-minute process, such as you did when you registered on the EVDS for the vaccination program. Then the system allocates you an ID number. There are about 55 million people who have already been allocated these numbers. That number is your file number for the rest of your life. Doesn't matter where you go in the health system once we integrate public and private and across all 9 provinces. So once you are known to the system, and of course we need to put additional measures in place, so we are beginning to implement biometrics using the 42-point fingerprint AFIS technology. But once you are in the system and we know about you, then yes, you will be able to access healthcare services at the points of care free of charge. Getting there will take a while, several years, because there will be a phasing in, as you have indicated.
All right. And then there's also word, Doctor, that the money will come from general tax revenue, payroll taxes, such as on personal income tax. Can you explain the criteria and the formula around this?
Okay, so let's start with where the money is. As I indicated, we already have 265 billion rand, which we already pay in tax that is spent, allocated to the numerous government departments, mostly the provincial administrations, but also the National Department of Health and to the Defence Force and so on. That's 265 billion. Then we subsidize, the state subsidizes private people to have a medical scheme to the tune of about 37 billion rand. Those are the tax credits we talk about, which we believe should be systematically reallocated to this tax pool for the NHI fund. So actually that is real money. Then there are monies that are paid in subsidies, public sector, state money paid in subsidies to employees to fund the medical schemes of employees of the state. That's about 70 billion rand a year. And instead of sending it to the 72 medical schemes, it needs to systematically be sent to the fund, because it'll be the fund and no longer the medical schemes that are paying for your healthcare. And there are a number of other sources of money that are currently in the system. So what is left after all of that is at a maximum 200 billion rand, but our estimates are lower than that, which are voluntary payments to medical schemes by members. And that's the money that needs to be raised. So you and I, if we're on a medical scheme, instead of paying the medical schemes levies every month, will have that amount of money taxed. The question is how it's taxed. And that will be a matter when that time arrives, in 5 or 6 years' time, that the Minister of Finance at that time will have to consider under the economic circumstances of the day. But what the bill does is it provides two options that are not currently at our disposal. And one is a payroll tax and the other one is a levy.
And then, Doctor, will private insurers then still have to pay for products as well as services?
There's a difference between private insurers and medical schemes, very big difference. Medical schemes are required to pay for PMBs, the prescribed minimum benefits, and they pay for other things depending on what you are purchasing in the package. There are over 300 different options available in the 72 medical schemes. So it's very difficult to decide. But once you have selected an option, the medical schemes currently pay for your services. Indeed, when the NHI fund reaches that point, the medical schemes will no longer be allowed to pay for those services, and they will only be able to insure and pay for services that the fund is not paying for.
Very interesting, Doctor. Now, is there any word at this current stage on when the President will actually sign the bill into law so that you can begin with the implementation phase?
Yeah, Alicia, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not even sure if Parliament has already referred it to the President, but I'm sure that when that happens, the President will probably ask the Minister of Health for comment on those submissions that the President has received. And the Minister of Health, together with the Department, will have to submit responses in that regard. But I have no idea what happens, what the timelines are on that.
All right. And Doctor, very quickly in closing, I mean, we've heard various bodies like your health professionals who have been strongly against the implementation of this scheme. Why do you think this is? I mean, is there still confusion as to how this scheme is actually going to benefit all South Africans? Or what do you think is the backlash?
Yeah, Alicia, this is a normal process in all countries. We were warned when we embarked on the journey that it will be the doctors in particular that will object.
Yeah.
Of course, we now know that it's not all doctors that object. Even members of SAMA support the NHI, and SAMA is the one that's the most outspoken. But there's Samatu and their members who are strongly in favor of the NHI and will give completely different reasons from the other bodies. So that's their prerogative to have their views. There are many other bodies, including councils and memberships like nursing organizations and so on, who also support the NHI. So one must be careful of jumping to conclusions that everybody rejects the NHI. What we do know is the strongest objection is coming from those who have the greatest financial loss to be made because they are listed companies and others that will no longer have a role to play in the space, or that their role will be dramatically reduced in the space.
Thank you so much for that insight. That is Dr. Nicholas Crisp, Deputy Director General of the NHI Art at the Department of Health, giving us some insight into the bill. We're going to take a quick ad break now. More of the Weekend Review coming up after the break. Welcome back. Well, the suspected mastermind behind the burglary at President Cyril Ramaphosa's Palapala farm, Emmanuel David, has been denied bail in the Bela Bela Magistrates Court out in Limpopo. The court says that David doesn't have a stable address and is a flight risk. David and his two co-accused face charges of housebreaking, theft and conspiracy to commit housebreaking with intent to steal. Now, they allegedly stole $580,000 from the farm in February of 2020. David remains in custody after his two co-accused were granted bail 2 weeks ago. Pakistan activist Malala Yousafzai says the world must cut off ties with the Taliban. She says girls are not able to go to school in Afghanistan and in some parts of Pakistan. The Nobel Peace Laureate delivered the 21st Nelson Mandela Lecture in Johannesburg. She used the address to urge the world not to turn a blind eye on the plight of women and girls who are still subjected to oppression. Yousafzai also paid tribute to the late former President Nelson Mandela. Kylie Kumalo has more on the story.
As we press to make gender apartheid a crime against humanity, there's more we can do now. First, international actors must resist normalizing relations with the Taliban. This includes governments, conference organizers, and UN officials engaging with the Taliban as if they were just another partner.
Fearless and assertive, Malala Yousafzai has made a clarion call to the world not to recognize the Taliban as the legitimate rulers in Afghanistan and Pakistan. She has painted a bleak picture about the suffering of women and girls in that part of the world.
The world has turned its back on the Afghan people. Maybe this reflects the sheer number of crises the world is facing. Violence and displacement in Sudan, famine in Yemen, the climate crisis being debated right now at COP28, war in Ukraine, and of course, the unjust bombardment of Gaza, where a child is killed every 10 minutes. So much of humanity is wounded.
Former First Lady Graça Machel says women are facing oppression and it should never be accepted.
This is an affront to all women in the world, by the way. This is an affront for all of us. Because, you know, we live with the gender-based violence, which is everywhere in any country in the world. And we think, oh, it's okay, we try to find some kind of justifications. But you know, what is happening in that country, don't fool ourselves. Other countries can copy this and make it a legal system, a system of governance to say the horrors of gender-based violence which we are living with can be transformed on a system of governance against women.
The Nelson Mandela Foundation says this remains one of the key platforms to address social issues facing the world.
The importance of this lecture, among other things, is to keep in mind what was one of the uppermost things to Madiba, keeping alive the legacy that following each lecture, there are dialogues that take place, because dialogues are very important to how our country became free.
This is one of the ways of ensuring that Madiba's legacy is preserved and continues to inspire generations yet to come. Kylie Kumalo, SABC News, Johannesburg.
President Cyril Ramaphosa says the ANC regrets the departure of struggle veteran Mavuso Msimang following his resignation from the party after more than 60 years. Msimang announced cutting ties with the ANC following years of increasing concerns over growing levels of corruption. Msimang has told the SABC News that the ANC leadership has shown no urgency in arresting the situation.
It's been a bit difficult. It's not an easy decision at all, not at all. actually, what was not announced was that 3-4 weeks ago, I actually resigned from being the deputy president of the Veterans League. But that really had a lot more to do with the things I want to do. I think the reliance on people of shady characters, the keeping company with those people, is what has cost the president the reputation that he had. But you know, you're talking about supporting him. I thought he was working something out, and it was clear that it wasn't happening. But when crazy things did take place, like the stealing that took place, the corruption around the COVID, you know, the PPE. The PPEs. Yeah, I mean, the sanction that ought to happen is, if you do nothing else, forget what the courts do, is to say, this one must be out of here. We'll deal with them, because no one is entitled to a position or so.
For more on this now, let's welcome political analyst Kanye Magobane. Kanye, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Look, in his resignation letter, Dr. Msimang raises concern of the ANC's own track record of corruption, which he says is now part of the movement's DNA, dwindling electoral prospects, as well as the party's inability to act against those accused of criminality as some of his major concerns. Talk to me about how you think this will impact the ruling party as we head into the 2024 general elections.
Thank you very much. And I think that the narrative right now is really about the timing that this letter has come out. And so the convenient narrative to take is how it's going to impact the elections. And we've seen the SG Fikile Mbalula decrying the decampaigning of the ANC by its elders. But I think that it's also important for us to contextualize Mavuso Msimang within the organization and who he is to the organization, because many people, especially young people, may not even be privy to who he is in terms of the organization. You're talking about somebody here who was one of the chiefs of the MK in exile. He was the chief of communications in Umkhonto weSizwe, and we're talking here about underground communications network, intercepting, spyware. He lived in Zambia with a big community of South Africans, and his contemporaries were people like Chris Hani, like Joe Mudise, people like Sendisi Jake, who were all different heads of operations of the MK. And for somebody who was out of the country from the 60s and only came back into South Africa in the early 90s, you see someone that spent a great deal of his life having left his family, his home behind to fight the apartheid movement from outside of the country. So somebody like that has institutional knowledge, has institutional memory. And I do concur with the president when he said that it is a sad day when the ANC can lose somebody of that caliber. Before we even get into the issues that he raises into in his resignation letter, but just contextualizing him as an elder who has walked with the movement from his youth up until now. You know, those are people who stay in power. Those are people with a voice of reason. And as such, the ANC should look at itself and look internally at many of the issues that he raises and ask themselves, going into the elections, is the next administration going to be any different from the previous administrations since 1994 that have brought the country almost to its knees? And those are the issues that Mavuso Msimang is lamenting about in his letter.
Look, Kanye, what do you make then of the recent reports that say the ANC stalwart, Dr. Mavuso, was consulted on the launching of a new party by Roger Jardine, but was not asked to join it? He, however, on the other hand, has emphasized that that his time will be better spent elsewhere.
Well, I mean, he may have been considering other political homes, which of course would be within his right because each political party is joined voluntarily. So perhaps a few weeks or months down the line, we may see him popping up in another political formation, or he may not. So for all intents and purposes, we don't know how he's going to play his cards. He's keeping those very close to his chest and simply saying that he's got other aspirations that he would like to pursue at the moment. And I think that what this letter does is brings us back to the core issues that people are constantly crying that the ANC is not renewing itself nearly at the rate that it would want to, because the issue of corruption keeps coming back over and over and over again. And we can look at Mavuso Msimang's letter and look at it, very historically. It's not the first time that the ANC finds itself with its seniors hitting hard at them through such letters. We can just go back and look at Chris Hani having written the Hani, what's now known as the Hani Memorandum, where he accused the ANC of losing its way, where he accused many of the political leaders of the time of traveling the world to pursue their own business interests, and calling the leaders and calling the movement to come back to the basics of building the structures of the ANC, coming back to the reasons why the party was formed in the first place. So it seems as if history keeps repeating itself, and it keeps repeating itself because such letters are simply disregarded, in my view. I don't think that the issues that he's raised in the letter are going to be taken as seriously as he would hope. His letter has been labeled as a decampaign of the ANC. And so given that type of approach, it's highly unlikely that the ANC will take this letter and put it on the table and say, let's unpack these issues and let's see how we can do differently, how we can do better, so that in 5 years' time, when we go to the elections yet again, we can see a type of improvement. We can see how the ANC has renewed itself, has acted on its own, call for anti-corruption, has brought people to book, has brought people to jail. So those are the things that I think this letter has the opportunity to do. The question is, are the leaders in the ANC up to that challenge right now?
And speaking of other leaders, Kanye, there we've seen, of course, I think on social media where Ace Magashule has been alluding to the fact that some of the members of the ANC that are still currently within the party, these are still just allegations, have actually approached him about the possibility of joining the party, but that is still not confirmed yet. But some analysts have also weighed in on the matter and have said that Msimang's resignation from the ANC is not surprising. And what do you make then of the surplus of the veterans as well as some of the prominent leaders in the ANC resigning en masse?
Well, I think that it is a worrying trend, because what we're going to end up with is a house without elders.
Yeah.
And we know that when you walk into a home and a child opens a door, what's the first thing you ask? Are there elders that I can speak to? But if the child says, no, there are no elders, it's just us, then you know that there is a missing gap. There is a missing type of generational succession that is not taking place. It should worry them, because then it means the elders can no longer relate to the principles of the ANC. It means the elders and the people that are living can no longer relate to what the ANC had set out to be for itself in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, which was the impetus for them fighting apartheid. They wanted a better life for all. That's the slogan that the ANC has pushed year in, year out. And now we are sitting 30 years after our elections, and Mavuso Msimang is raising critical issues of governance and how corruption actually undercuts the issues of governance. He talks about life esidimeni. He talks about ESCOM. He talks about how the caliber of the cadre has actually dropped over the years, that you just don't have the same quality of leadership, that you just don't have the same quality of people who want to have South Africans in a better place. And he's pointing to the politics of the stomach having taken great precedence over everything that the set itself to be out. And that's a dangerous place to be.
Very dangerous indeed. Thank you so much, Kanye. And we also heard former President Thabo Mbeki saying that renewal has basically failed within the ANC. That was political analyst Kanye Makubani on the resignation of ANC stalwart Dr. Mavuso Msimang. The DA in KwaZulu-Natal has announced it has increased the reward for information that leads to the arrest and conviction of the killers of its chief whip in the Umgeni municipality, Councillor Nhlalayenza Ndlovu. Ndlovu was gunned down in front of his wife and children by attackers who came to his home in Bopomeni at Howick earlier this week. The DA's Umgeni Mayor Chris Papas initially offered a reward of 100,000 rand, and in a statement the party says it will spare no expense and leave no stone unturned to hold those responsible for Ndlovu's death. The National Assembly still has a few more committees sitting over the next few days before it wraps its work for the year, but members of Parliament have expressed appreciation to the staff of the legislature who helped keep the institution running behind the scenes. Yesterday was the official closing of the National Assembly for this year.
The farewell speeches session gives MPs the opportunity to express gratitude. Parliament's legal teams, table staff, protection services, research and communication teams, as well as general workers, are the people who pull together to ensure the day-to-day running of the institution.
We wouldn't have been able to do our work without the guidance of the NA table led by Mr. Kaso and his team. We want to appreciate their guidance and also their advice, always. Also to thank the Parliamentary Protection Services for ensuring that the House is not disrupted at all times. They are doing a very great work. The South African Police Services for ensuring our safety in the parliamentary precinct.
Allow me to wish all of our members and our parliamentary staff. I do want to say here at this point that we do appreciate the work that our parliamentary staff do in the background under very difficult circumstances at times.
EFF wishes South Africans, including members of this House, regardless of political affiliations, a safe, enjoyable holiday, and your families. May God protect you and may Allah protect you.
On behalf of Honorable Velenkosini Tlhabisa, the President of the IFP and leader of the IFP in the National Assembly, I want to also echo the sentiments of thanking the Honorable Speaker, all the presiding officers.
I wish to thank on behalf of the Freedom Front Plus all members for this year and for making it a success. We did a lot and we left a lot up until very late, and we worked very hard now in this fourth quarter. But I do want to thank everybody, especially the staff, parliamentary staff, for all their sacrifices.
I also want to thank the President, the Speaker of Parliament, House chairpersons, leaders of parties, members of this House, and parliamentary staff for their support and prayers through my difficult time. I particularly want to thank my colleagues in the ACDP who prayed for me and gave me space and time to mourn the loss of my precious wife.
As we end this year and enter what is meant to be the festive season, we must acknowledge that for many South Africans, the season will not be festive, but will be stressful. Despite all of these stresses, we wish all South Africans a peaceful season. We truly hope that 2024 will bring new prospects for all South Africans, but especially for those who spend their days and nights worried about their family's survival.
Let me also say this, that the support that we've got from the Honorable Speaker, the Deputy Speaker, who we haven't seen for a while, I'm not sure why, the chairpersons, presiding officers, the chief whips, and very importantly, Mr. Kaso and his entire team. Whether you talk about members' facilities, you talk about the travel, you talk about them, really extraordinary service. I know sometimes I've put them under pressure at different times of the day or the night.
Let me express many thanks to all those who welcomed me in this chamber, especially the parliamentary staff. They were exceptionally good. And as for members, I can assure you that we have all strove hard in the interest of the people of our country.
I think the Sixth Parliament can be proud of all its honourable members, and we need to reflect on that at this time of the year. The parliamentary staff did us proud at the BRICS Forum, and once again, we would like to wish them well. The presiding officers gave leadership to the nation when it was needed.
Before we adjourn, I think I should say a few words. We have reached the end of the last full year of the Sixth Parliament. Next year, South Africa will hold its 7th democratic election. Democracy is an ideal for which many died, but it is also made real by our actions as citizens and public representatives. This year, we've indeed advanced the democratic project. We have passed a number of bills which will have lasting impact on our society. To close, on behalf of the presiding officers, honorable members, I would like to express my gratitude, firstly to the Chief Whip and to all party leaders, to the Whippery in particular, for their support, to the programming committee, which has assisted me and guided me at some of the worst of times as I was battling to find my feet in this environment. I must also thank the table staff led by Mr. Klaso, the Secretary to Parliament for efforts. I must finally thank all the honourable members for their contribution and commitment to our democracy.
Parties also called on South Africans to remain safe during the season, with some reminding them to be safe on the roads and not drive while drunk. Some parties also called for peace and safety and an end to the violence in the Middle East. Abra Babia, SABC News, Parliament.
Welcome back. The local economy shrank in the third quarter. Stats South Africa data shows the economy contracted by 0.2% in the quarter. That's down from a positive 0.5% in the second quarter. The economy continued to battle load shedding and logistical challenges, hindering economic activity, as well as a high interest rate environment dampening consumer confidence.
The negativity in the economy in the third quarter was widespread, mainly across the productive sectors of the economy. The agriculture, manufacturing, construction and mining, as well as trade industries, all recorded negative growth. The agriculture sector recorded decreased economic activity, reported for field crops, animal products and horticulture products. In the mining sector, decreased economic activity was reported for platinum group metals, gold and manganese ore. The mining and manufacturing sectors continue to bear the brunt of the structural constraints on the economy.
From the first quarter of this year, it was 0.4%. and then 0.5% in the second quarter as revised, and now negative 0.2%. So we have been tapering around your level of zero, and anytime it would go slightly up or go down, and in this regard it has gone down. And of course we can see that there are sectors in the tertiary sector, largely in the services, that have tried to want to lift the economy. But both the primary and the secondary sector have seen drawdowns that were weighing heavily and returned a negative 0.2%.
The negativity is blamed on the structural constraints like the load shedding and logistics inefficiencies.
Essentially, the economy is just stagnating. Or if we take a longer term perspective, then if I look at where we're now relative to prior to the pandemic, then we can clearly see a distinction between the momentum in the goods producing sectors and the services part of the economy. In other words, your goods producing sectors combined, so mining, manufacturing, etc., is really just stagnating, very flat. And that makes sense if we don't have electricity to be able to grow volumes. Whereas the services sectors are a little bit less directly affected by the infrastructure constraint.
Household expenditure also decreased, indicative of the impact of the high cost of living crisis, putting household finances under pressure.
If you look on the consumption side, it is the consumer that have taken a big knock, and gross fixed capital formation that is also not holding up. So it's quite obvious that load shedding continues to have a significant impact. Transnet's logistics failure and dysfunction also having an impact, even though global growth continues to hold up. And then if you look at the consumer, it is under a squeeze because of a significant increase in interest rates that we have seen, still high inflation that is eroding consumer purchasing power. All of those are combining to drag economic growth lower.
With the productive sectors of the economy working on solutions to the structural constraints hindering activity, like investing in own energy generation, while logistics problems will likely persist for some time, it's expected that the negativity in these sectors will continue until solutions come to fruition. Things do look slightly better in the coming year, with inflation expected to edge lower, which could lead to the Reserve Bank cutting interest rates. Gloria Stefago-Mosi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
The airport company South Africa has assured air travellers using its facilities of a seamless experience this holiday season. AXA anticipates a high number of passengers this festive season compared to the previous years. The company has acquired aviation fuel supply assets from BP Southern Africa to ensure adequate supply for all airlines. However, AXA is still in the process of appointing a new contractor to provide IT support to check in passengers and bags.
The contract to provide technical services to airlines within AXA's airports ended last month. Various airlines have long raised concerns about the long delays in the appointment of a new service provider. And with AXA's aging infrastructure, there are concerns that any technical glitch could be costly. But AXA's CEO Mpumi Mpofu has assured travellers that the company, which owns the country's major airports, is working hard to avoid any disruptions.
The e-gates were installed in Cape Town, they're now being installed here. Facial recognition is currently being finalized, and the implementation, we've gone out on tender and basically will come back. The biometrics, which we're also doing with Home Affairs, are also being finalized. The biometric thing did create a little bit of a problem because of what we call biometric registration, and passengers were up in arms, and then we found strategies to divert and manage.
AXA is currently in its peak season, which started at the end of October and is expected to run until the end of March next year. AXA says it has ensured that its fuel tanks are ready for any unforeseen circumstances during this season to ensure smooth operations and a seamless travel experience.
AXA and the airports, we run the fuel farms, but more importantly, we now have taken responsibility for the into-plane services, which will enable us to do that. So taking over those assets in the various smaller airports, one was initially because they were pulling out. So the decision was taken by BP to leave South Africa or to leave the jet fuel space. I think they left jet fuel, and they made an announcement, and they were quite clear, just in their own analysis as a company, they didn't think jet fuel was a space they wanted to focus in South Africa particularly. Our ability to actually take over those assets was in order to continue providing a critical service to passengers and ensuring that the airlines are not found without fuel in those small airports where those assets were held.
Passengers are advised to familiarize themselves with the practices of the airports to avoid disappointment. Nothando Makutulela, SABC News, Johannesburg.
The healthcare workers who died during the gas tanker explosion in Boksburg in Gauteng on Christmas Eve last year were honored yesterday. 12 healthcare workers were killed when a gas tanker got stuck under a bridge and exploded near the Tambo Memorial Hospital. A wall of remembrance was unveiled at the hospital to mark the one-year anniversary of the tragedy.
12 heroes honored, unveiling the wall of remembrance. Colleagues, family and friends paid tribute.
We feel as professionals and as nurses and a driver that died on that day, we feel very much happy that they were recognized, and their families as well are given at least the closure today.
Families of the healthcare workers say their loss has been traumatic. However, the past year has brought some healing. They express gratitude for the wall of remembrance, saying at least the memory and sacrifice of their loved ones were not in vain.
They were not just forgotten, but at least everybody knows that there were people that lost their lives when whatever happened here.
But for some families, the wall means very little. The brother of healthcare worker Peggy Maila says they've been struggling for close to a year to access her monies meant to support her 3 children.
It affects them a lot because, you know, if there is things like they have to eat school fees, and then now they are staying with their grandmother. So they're just struggling.
We have managed to resubmit all of these claims. We are assured by our sister departments, Department of Employment and Labor, that from the time when we have lodged the claims to the time when they are given the awards, it shouldn't exceed more than 30 days. So the expected dates on which all families would have had all of their awards would not be later than January 2024.
Paying tribute, the Gauteng Health MEC reflected on the pain suffered by healthcare workers on Christmas Eve last year. She says this wall will immortalize their sacrifices.
This wall is not just a structure of stone and names. It is a symbol of the lives that touched us, the hands that healed, and the hearts that cared. It is a reminder of the personal sacrifices made and the professional dedication shown by our colleagues. In this way, the wall serves as a lasting tribute and ensuring that their contributions to our hospital and community are never forgotten.
The survivors of the blast were also honored for their dedication and courage. As Christmas approaches, many at this hospital and community at large are reminded of the devastation that changed their lives forever. But hopefully, this wall of remembrance can bring them some form of solace this festive season. Patricia Fasahi, SABC News at the Tambo Memorial Hospital in Boksburg.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us. That's where we're going to leave it for today. Do have yourself a wonderful afternoon further. I am Alicia Jali. Goodbye.